Hello everybody, my name is Michael Herkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm the Programming Coordinator for Infotex and the moderator for today's webinar. Questions to ask when you're searching for a SIEM. Yes, for those of you who are worried that you're in the wrong webinar, how to select a SIEM and get a good night's sleep, but Dan changed it again. Now, on to the main event. Please allow me to introduce to you our speaker. He is a managing partner here at Infotex, the awareness guru of Indiana, the man with 13 letters after his name, but he doesn't brag. He lets me do that for him. Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. And I normally do a shout out at the beginning of each of these webinars. And so I just want you to know that, I don't know if you saw it at the beginning of the webinar, there was a little flash of a guest star. My shout out today is going to be to Michael Harkey. I don't know if you noticed, Michael, but I would like you to kind of present, I don't know, a good portion of this webinar today. I was hoping maybe you can come up with technical questions that should be asked when looking for a SIEM.
I'll get right on
I
it.
can definitely, you get right on it, and I'll let you know when we're ready for you. So we've got a pretty aggressive agenda today, as Michael alluded to at the beginning of the webinar. I have a feeling we're going to go very long on this. Could be as long as 90 minutes, maybe even longer. We've never done anything like this before. Interestingly, we are a managed security service provider. We actually have been developing a SIEM since 2005. This is the first time we've actually presented on a SIEM. So we're going to start with the bigger picture, really talk a little bit about outsourcing the monitoring process. And then from there, we'll have Michael, talk about what kind of questions you should be asking when you actually sit down to a demo of a SIEM. And then, since we are in the business of presenting a SIEM, I feel like I should spend a little bit of time explaining why Infotex is proud of what we're doing. And then, of course, we'll finish with the proverbial, what about the, cybersecurity assessment tool? How does a SIEM help us comply with the cybersecurity assessment tool? And so I want you to also know that we're starting with some prerequisites today. First of all, we're assuming that your management team has already pulled their head out of the sand and are recognizing that maybe they need to spring for a SIEM. For your larger organizations, you might be thinking, should we do it ourselves or should we outsource it? For your smaller organizations, you're probably thinking that it's something that you're going to have to outsource. Hopefully, your management team is all aware of the fact that it's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we also are proceeding as if you already are in the market for a SIEM. You've already decided that, hey, we need a SIEM. We've sold our management on the need for a SIEM. Now it's time to find out what's out there and really to create a plan for how we're going to bring a SIEM into our own organization. Finally, another prerequisite, so to speak, is that I'm assuming you have a basic understanding of incident response management. If you recognize what this graphic over here, if you might not have heard it this way, but if I propose to you that incident response is the intersection of awareness, risk management, and business continuity, we're assuming that you would understand exactly what we mean by that. If not, definitely go out to tour.infotex.com. I've just kind of listed the movies that we already have out there, and you'll see there's already a lot out there that will give you a good basis for incident response, starting with the where are we going there? The cyber, compliance. This is a lot about incident response. Obviously, incident response in the world of CAT domains 2, 3, and 5, but then also disaster planning meets awareness training meets risk monitoring are all good, really, movies that you can watch to bring you up to speed on incident response management. One of the things that you also should be prepared for is that you're going to experience a lot of value out of a SIEM that you weren't expecting. Most of us are probably right now dusting off and getting out our IT strategy and saying we need to incorporate a SIEM more because of compliance reasons than because of security reasons. The cybersecurity assessment tool has been a very good sales tool for Infotex and every other managed security service provider out there, because now everybody is being required, or at least having to explain why they don't have a SIEM, or at least a plan to implement a SIEM, because it's really going to help you comply with that cybersecurity assessment tool. But what we want you to know is there's a lot more value that comes out of a SIEM than the compliance value or even the security value. that a SIEM really kind of puts you in a position where you're going to be able to benefit from the troubleshooting aspects that come out of having all of your logs in a database that's searchable. And so the main thing that we believe is going to be a deliverable or an outcome by having a good, solid design SIEM is that you're going to be in a position where your management team recognizes the incident management process as it unfolds when that career-threatening event occurs. So what I decided to do, and yes, Michael's right, I renamed the webinar again. We come up with these webinar topics about 3-4 months before we actually deliver them. By the time we get there, I've changed what I want the webinar to be about. So this time it's really more about what questions should we be asking when we look into a SIEM, when we implement that strategy that we've got right now of trying to decide how we're going to incorporate a SIEM into our system. And so the first question I think that should be asked is really makes a great metaphor. It's a question we've all been asking since the buzzword SIEM first came out, and that is, what the heck do we call it? Is it a SIEM? Is it a SIEM? Is it a security information event management system? Or is it a security event information management system? And just so you know, Infotex has been struggling with this since 2005. And we started our MSSP in 2000, but we didn't really start monitoring logs until 2005. And our geeks, our technical people at that time just called it Logmon. We're going to monitor event logs, right? And then from there, we decided, well, maybe we better call it event log management. We were seeing our competitors use more professional terms for it. Then we were really proud of how we could present everything in what we called a visualization interface. And so we took to calling it an ELM interface, and then eventually we decided maybe we better call it a security event information management system, and then everybody changed that. Next thing you know, we decided that it seems like SIEM, so we're going to call it a SIEM as in SIEM. And so once we made that decision, it took everybody a little while to get in the habit of saying SIEM instead of SIEM. But the metaphor for that is important. And the reason why I kind of bring that up in tongue in cheek, of course, but also as an important concept to waste some time in this webinar that might already go long, is because not only do people not really know what to call it, but vendors don't really know what it should be, or we're starting to now figure out what it should be. But obviously in 2005, we didn't even know that a SIEM or a SIEM or SEIM was going to be something that we needed to pull together. Now, Infotex from the beginning had kind of a mission that we wanted to have a place where we could cross-check threat intelligence with real-time data. And we also then kind of realized that we need to create a portal where all three teams, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, can visually present their own perspective on the incident management process. And thus, we have a place where we can all get on the same page. And then where we're really starting to realize we need to be is we want a portal that not only facilitates response, but also that facilitates training, planning, and monitoring. Our portal has always facilitated monitoring and response. Now we want to try to take it to the next level and really make it be the place that the incident response team gathers around once a month when they have their monthly incident response team meetings, or quarterly if you're still trying to get all that work done once a quarter. NIST, who in their special publication 800-61 really kind of laid out what we've all been preaching since about 2004 related to information security, definitely establishes that people are a big part of the process, right? That we need to really recognize that we've got human beings that need to be managed, that need to be trained, that need to have expectations set, that need to be monitored in terms of whether they're meeting those expectations, both from inside the organization, but also from outside the organization as well. And so, we've been preaching for quite a while that, we need to listen. We need to see ourselves as sensors is what I thought would be a good thing to say. And then when I ran that by my wife, actually, she thought it'd be dumb to call human beings sensors. But we really want to create a place in our organization where people are encouraged to self-report, where employees are seen as part of the monitoring process, and that really what it's all about is filtering what we learn into the incident response team. And so, we have both non-technical monitoring, looking for policy violations, making sure the incident response team is aware of the fact that we did horribly on our last phishing test, making sure that the IRT knows that we've got 8 new employees in our 50 employee, bank, and therefore we might have a little bit of heightened risk in terms of, awareness training, that sort of thing. Then, of course, the tracking and escalation of incidents is a very important part of the non-technical side of monitoring. I feel like it's really the cusp of what we're doing from the non-technical side. Most of you, when you saw the announcement that we're going to be talking about SIEM, really was probably dialing into this because you wanted to see the latest and greatest, or hear what you need to be looking for when you start looking at technical monitoring. And obviously that's really where our bread and butter is. That's what we sell for a living as a managed security service provider. And there are very, very important aspects of technical monitoring that is covered by your MSSP. But then there's also very important parts of technical monitoring that's covered by other parties, your auditors, your internal technology team, what we've taken to calling the technology recovery team. And out of need, out of the fact that we want to have executives, marketing, human resources on the incident response team, our policies and procedures documentation has evolved over time to identify a subset of that incident response team and call that subset the technical recovery team, so that we don't have to bog down management and all that in the important but seemingly mundane tasks like following up on viruses, following up on false positives, following up on a lot of information that, gosh, do we really need to involve the people that don't even understand what we're talking about in this process? And so, to me, the ultimate view that the incident response team has, the ultimate paper trail that your examiners and auditors probably ask for. If you are in the business of selling your services to another bank, the answer to the question, have you ever had an incident, is really that incident response tracking spreadsheet. And so what I'd like to do here real quick, I hope I remembered to bring it down to my laptop. Yeah, so we'll just kind of pull this over. Is Michael will be, by the way, making sure that everybody that comes to the webinar gets a copy of these. But to me, the ultimate view as to, how are we doing is an incident response tracking document. It doesn't have to be a spreadsheet. This is the boilerplate that Infotex recommends that you use. And so, we really need to have a method of keeping track of everything negative that happened on the incident. This is kind of hard to see, I'm sure, so I'm going to just kind of increase the zoom on this. Let's get it to about 120%, let's say. Because what I'm working towards here is that we want to not just document our disclosure incidents. If when your auditor comes in and says, have you had any incidents, and all you're doing is giving them the 2 disclosure incidents where we had to inform our customers over the course of the last 2 years. Well, the question is how well are you tracking this? So what we try to do is we try to encourage our clients to document everything, including the incident response tests that they're conducting on a regular basis. And so what we did to because how does that look is a good question. And so what we did is, green is example, by the way, in our boilerplates. And so what we did is I can see I probably reviewed this, and so I always use filtering stuff when I reviewed this. So let's unfilter this. So you can see we've got, a good set of examples in here that you can see. This is kind of, so as you see, there's usually a whole bunch of negative stuff that's happening where we don't have to inform our customers. And then every once in a while, yes, we do have to inform our customers. The point is, what your examiners want to see, what your auditors want to see, is that you've conducted some kind of a postmortem review. And so this is the part that I really want to establish here, by the way, from what does this look like, is that the postmortem review doesn't have to be anything really fancy. I would say for a disclosure incident, yeah, let's refer out to some other document that's board presentable. But for these negative incidents, that postmortem review can just be an entry in a spreadsheet like this, where we're documenting when we did the postmortem review as well as when we closed it. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but disclosure incidents are usually closed, within 90 days, maybe even 120 days sometimes, after the postmortem review date, because we still need to put together the fancy looking report and take that into the board. So I'm probably getting a little bit off the beaten track, but the question is how is the SIEM going to facilitate all that? And so where we kind of have arrived when it comes to the evolution of our own thinking is that we really have three teams working as a team when it comes to risk monitoring. We have the internal technology team, or what I call the technology recovery team, that group of people, that subset of the incident response team. We have the incident response team at large, and then we have the managed security service provider, or in the larger organizations, that's a security group, the people that are watching traffic and event logs in real time and that are actually using the SIEM. And so what we're establishing is that there's a lot of different information needs to come together. I mean, there's all kinds of reports being run by the technology recovery team that ought to be looked at when we say, hey, let's look at our SIEM. And so how are we going to incorporate these kind of reports into our overall SIEM? We're currently working with a partner right now, by the way, who has their own set of reports where we can actually just read in the PDFs that these reports are coming from, so that we can actually present this information side by side with this type of information, the non-technical threat-free, pretty much FSISAC is what most financial institutions are defaulting to now on that, because your examiners are asking if you're a member of it, right? But also, policy and procedure enforcement, accepted risk. Every time we do a risk assessment, ultimately we're accepting risk. Well, any accepted risk that's of a higher critical nature, we should be bringing that into the incident response team so that we can monitor that accepted risk. And then, of course, incident response itself, which is spelled wrong here, the decision to notify. That's when we really want to bring up the incident response team, right? The technology recovery team can handle that nuisance virus, but if the virus exfiltrated data and we're going to have to talk to our customers about that, that's when we bring the incident response team into the equation. And then over here on the MSSP side is really where we're performing the IDS, the IPS, the event log management. We do have some IDS and IPS coming out of the UTM, and it'd be nice to correlate those reports so that we can keep our MSSP honest, right? If we're seeing stuff the MSSP did not see, we've got a problem somewhere. Maybe we don't have full coverage, maybe there's some dark spots that can be made light, et cetera. So these three teams need to work together as a team, and the SIEM is where the team can come together. I guess my rhyming is kind of ran out of rhymes there. But so what I've been saying is that where Infotex is going is our SIEM will be a SIEM of SIEMs. So in other words, our SIEM is going to be able to present the needs from all three of these teams. Are we doing that yet? Well, no, we're not. But we are working in that direction. Meanwhile, what we're basically doing is we're saying we're trying to get our clients ready that you should be having monthly, in our opinion, incident response team meetings. Even the smallest of banks should be having an incident response team meeting on a monthly basis, because we feel that there's enough work to be achieved to where if you can do that work as a team rather than as, silos, you'll get more awareness, you'll get more monitoring, you'll get better results. And so anyway, does your, contract with your MSSP, where we're heading to, spell out how often you're going to be able to sit down with your MSSP and talk to them about the meaning of the reports, et cetera, that are coming out of there. So if we were to make a list of the high-level questions that you should be asking when you look into a SIEM, obviously the first one being how do you pronounce it, but the second one being not only, what is your SIEM going to be now? What is your SIEM now? But where are you headed? Everybody is evolving their SIEM. SecureWorks, Infotex, Trustwave, Perimeter, Datacom. When you ask us, what does your SIEM do? Most of us are compelled to more talk about what our SIEM is going to do. There's a whole bunch of really cool applications being developed as we speak that we're all looking at incorporating into our SIEM. We're waiting for the risk reward, the return on investment, the technology itself to come out of the innovative phase, maybe into early adopter or even, early majority phase of adoption. But it's a moving target, and you should ask your MSSP, will you be providing a SIEM that's going to allow all three of my teams to get on the same page. Will your SIEM only be technical, or will it facilitate the non-technical aspects of incident response? Because we've always said that incident response really requires a security monitoring architecture that includes assurance that we're following our plan. It includes an incident response team meeting, and then this meeting is really centered around that portal. And we've always said that the SIEM was the technical aspects of it, where we're bringing together logs from various places, where, you know what I mean, we're looking at what we're doing internal compared to what the managed security service provider is doing compared to what the incident response team is responsible from a monitoring perspective. You know, we've always known that the technical side of it is where we need to automate. Of course, technical things can be automated, right? But the main reason why is because there's a whole bunch of noise that if we can sort through that noise and really kind of pull out the needles in the haystack, so to speak, then we're in a position where we can deliver real-time response to stuff we don't like, where we can provide daily reports to where someone can acknowledge those daily reports, so that we are clearly meeting the NIST Special Publication 800-61 suggestion that a human being understand the meaning of what we're seeing in our event logs and our network traffic and sign off on that. And then, of course, we can then turn that noise into knowledge, maybe even, you know, information that can be used by the incident response team to not only prevent future incidents from occurring, but to put us in a better position where we recognize the process as it unfolds when we have that incident. And what we're really trying to avoid here is the risk of not monitoring risk, ultimately unauthorized access. But also there's a lot of different, you know, benefits that can come out of having a SIEM. And we believe it because we've seen it. No, we don't want to turn a lemon into a rotten lemon. I just saw that I grabbed the wrong slide to put this in here. What we're really saying is that you can avoid turning a lemon into a rotten lemon if you integrate the non-technical with the technical. So I would say the next question that you should be asking when you approach your MSSP is, okay, if we're outsourcing all this to you, do we have to do anything? Obviously, you're going to have to acknowledge reports. Obviously, you're going to have to understand those reports. I'm always concerned that when we set expectations with our prospective clients, that we're doing a good job of letting them know that, hey, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on your end. You're not just taking the whole incident response management prospect and sending it to us. I had tested in that was actually a brokerage firm it was a couple, 2-3 years ago, where they thought that since they were outsourced to an MSSP, that the MSSP would even decide when they were going to notify their customers. I went back and they decided they changed that decision to where it's the insurance company that was going to decide when to notify their customers. But the point is that it's not the MSSP, it's not the insurance company, it's not even the technology recovery team, it's management that needs to decide when we're going to notify our customers. What I'd like to do now is kind of drill down a little bit further into that MSSP concept. You know, Managed Security Service Provider is what MSSP stands for. And I'd just like to start off by establishing what an MSSP is. And so to me, the easiest way to say is the MSSP is usually the organization that handles intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, your SIEM, and your network monitoring in real time. And it's important to understand that a lot of network support providers, or people, IT support people, are billing their support as a managed service. So what they're basically saying is, instead of billing you hourly, we're going to just bill this as a flat fee. We're going to take everything you need, and we're billing it as a flat fee, a monthly fee of $2,000 a month or whatever. We've added up what we've been doing for you in the last 2 years, and it averages out to $24,000 a year. So to save everybody time, we're just going to start billing you $2,000 a month, realizing that we might go over 1 year, come in less another year, etc. That's a managed service. A managed security service provider does offer a managed service, but it does a lot it provides a much different functionality than the people who are taking care of your network for you if you're outsourcing your network support or your network administration. An MSSP can watch a network, but they're not supposed to be able to make changes to the network, or else you're losing the segregation of duties aspect benefit of hiring an MSSP. And so when you're talking to an organization, if they're not staffing 21 shifts a week, meaning that if you take a whole week and divide, there's 168 hours in a week, divide that by 8, that's 21 shifts a week, then they're not an MSSP. They're just trying to manage alerts by, getting them on their cell phone, and you just can't count on them, sorting through all the noise part-time, right? They should have full-time data security analysts that do nothing but watch networks. They should be receiving all kinds of training. The data security analysts should be. They should be getting certs. They should be, staying on top of what we call, intelligence. An MSSP should have been evolving security processes, evolving monitoring processes. Most of them since the 1990s. They should have been developing a SIEM. Most of us can say we started it in 2005, 2006. They should be subscribing to threat intelligence and not FSISAC. FSISAC is a great non-technical threat feed, and if you've been sending us alerts from FSISAC, still do that, please, because who knows, we could miss something. But usually when a client sends us something that they see on FSISAC, we've had it for at least a week, if not weeks. We're subscribing to pretty expensive threat intelligence feeds because it's our business. Most MSSPs have a team of programmers that are making sure that they're following specific quality controls, and MSSPs are being audited, and they should be, if you're a financial institution, they should be in the Technology Service Provider program, the FFIEC examination program. And so now that I've established what an MSSP is, I'd like to kind of talk to you a little bit about why you should outsource. And our largest client is a $14 billion bank, and they're outsourcing. And so if you're larger than 14 billion, maybe you should think about bringing it inside. But the notion of bringing network monitoring inside means that you're going to have to try to, on your own, hit all of the NIST indicators that are described, in terms of what should we be monitoring. What we find every time we engage with a new bank is that their technology staff is usually understaffed. They have very little time for anything. They're working on the urgent, important rather than the important priorities. They're really focused on the reliability of the system. They're constantly dealing with upgrades and helping their employees or user base overcome convenience issues. And no offense, but because they're focused in on all these, these issues that cause our eyes to glaze over, when we start talking about security, their eyes glaze over, right? And so, we have this as a standard situation in most banks that employ a technology staff. If you're outsourcing technology, you're definitely a prime target for outsourcing your security as well. But we've got a situation where the technology team is going to have to address the compliance needs, if not the security needs, of just watching logs. Forget the SIEM. Let's just focus in on watching logs. Most smaller community-based banks that have not outsourced event log management are simply ignoring their logs, or they've got a little process where they can show that a report goes into their inbox of all the failed logins in the last day or week or whatever, and they scan read those reports. Okay, that's simply not the best method of reducing the overhead of monitoring your network. Ignoring the logs are what we usually see. So the top 5 reasons, and this came from kind of a couple different studies that we saw. So I really can't quote the study. But we kind of pulled this out. Most people are now looking into a SIEM because of compliance reasons, either because you got to hit some baseline statements or evolving statements in a cybersecurity assessment tool, or your examiners talk to you about a segregation of duties issue. But there's a lot of other reasons why you can deploy a SIEM that people are citing as more important than just the compliance reasons. And so, when you outsource network monitoring, you're going to get a faster response. The people from bad guy land are usually working in the middle of the night, on holidays, on weekends. And so that 24/7 is very, very important there. You don't have to worry about vacation, turnover, paying benefits, training people. And then finally, we of course have that segregation of duties issue. And so what we basically tell our clients is, if you bring us on board, we're actually adding a layer of security to what you already have in place. We're going to be able to pick up the behavior of zero-day vulnerabilities, unnamed viruses, and even those targeted attacks. It's the primary value proposition is that human beings with brains are watching the network traffic and the event logs to make sure that we notice when the system behaves incorrectly, whether or not our signatures are noticing that activity or not. And I probably should say the word cyber at least once in this presentation, or else we won't get credit for it being a cyber presentation, right? So the deliverables that we usually see from a managed security service provider, beyond the real-time response, is that they're pulling all this into some pretty robust databases. So they're able to give us steering committee reports, daily reports, trend reports, investigative reports. We have a service called Put a Watch, which is very helpful in termination processing, because you can have a third party give a report to you that shows everything that was disabled when an employee left the organization. But also, if you have somebody you're worried about, we can watch all the activities of that particular user. Then, of course, Domain 3 has all kinds of requirements. Domain 3 of the cybersecurity assessment tool. And by the way, I am going to be getting to that after we go through the why should you consider Infotext part of this webinar. But the exam buzzwords that an MSSP will help you be able to respond to is, when your examiner says, well, who's watching a watcher? You can say, well, our MSSP is. Can you prove you've considered everything? Well, we've outsourced it to a company that is in the business of considering everything. What are you monitoring? Well, our MSSP has actually given us a report here of all our dark spots. So we're monitoring everything that's not in a dark spot. Can you prove it's working? Well, our MSSP is in a TSP examination program, but also, we have this health report, and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of different ways your MSSP is going to arm you with answers to the questions that maybe you've been having a hard time answering when your examiners are thinking outside of their examination box. I'm really noticing that we're going to go way over time on this if I don't pick this up a little bit. And so suffice it to say that, we already kind of went through that. So I'm going to move a little bit forward. The fourth question that you should be asking is, should we tackle this in-house? Are we going to try to handle our own monitoring? If you're not a regulated industry, from a compliance perspective, you can get away with that. We suggest that you might be fooling yourself if you try to get away with that. Finally, I want to just kind of circle back around to the segregation of duties issue, because it is something that the examiners are starting to get rather vocal about. Even in our smallest of banks, we have a single location bank where, because they're a client of ours, we were telling them, hey, eventually you guys are probably going to have to segregate the IT person from the ISO. And so they had kind of identified a bookkeeper who was going to be their ISO if the examiners ever said something about that. But before they actually got there, we were able to develop documentation to where we're watching everything that their IT person was doing. So when the examiners actually brought the question up, their answer was sufficient. We are properly segregating duties, because even though the ISO has administrator rights, every time the ISO logs in as administrator, somebody outside of the ISO's reporting sphere gets a report in real time. So the fifth question really that you should be asking, whether you're going to do it in-house or out-of-house, is who's going to watch the watcher? Who is going to be the person who protects those with administrator rights, because they'll be able to always say, hey, it wasn't me, go check the logs, go check the MSSP. We had a third party watching everything that I do. So, Michael, have you had a chance to put together your presentation yet?
I think I have something, Dan. Surprisingly, I was able to instantly and magically update the PowerPoint while you were working on it.
Wow,
So
nice.
we won't,
Nice.
yeah. So I'm going to get into the technical questions you should be asking. And I'm basing this essentially off the questions that I receive, giving demos of our SIEM and working with clients and potential clients. So I've kind of pulled out the top questions. What does deployment look like? That's essentially the first question, and for a lot of potential clients, the most important question. So first thing we want to do is a criticality analysis. So we want to make sure we're getting all the logs from your critical and high availability servers, and then we kind of work our way down from there. Obviously, we want to get all the logs from your Active Directory system, file system, anything like that we can use to correlate to security events, or just look for anomalies in activity on your network. Next would be sensor location. So, where does the sensor go? So for the IDS IPS sensor, we like to be, especially IPS, we like to be in between the ISP and the firewall. That way we, see all the traffic, we have all the recon, we can get all the intelligence. It's easier to piece the puzzle together. In some bank environments, that's just not possible. So in that case, we can sit behind the firewall. Whether that be managed by a third party or part of another network that can't be segregated, for whatever reason that may be. In that case, we typically are only going to be doing IDS, obviously, because that firewall or that system that's handling the external is already going to be processing that. For the Elm system, that sits inside your network. In our case, that sits inside your network. We see that as a plus, because your data never leaves the network. Your logs never leave the network. And then we also have the ability with the Elm side of things, as long as it's a lower amount of hosts, smaller banks. If you have a virtual environment, we're actually able to, create an image and just spin up a virtual log Elm sensor. So that way you don't have to have a physical piece of hardware. And it reduce the cost a little bit. So that might be an option. Last but not least, but mostly not least, very, very important, is tuning and customization. If you guys if anybody is here listening has tried to set up their own Elm system, IDS, IPS system, that's where it really gets complicated. So much time and effort has to be put into getting the system truly tuned to where it's not just noise. And then the strong suit, if you're looking, one of the things I'd say to look for in a strong SIEM package is customization. Here at Infotex, we're very highly customizable. Everything from our interfaces to our reporting to one-off, real-time reporting of temperature sensors or whatever it may be. We have an organic development system here at Infotex. So if we develop something for one client, we'll roll it out for all the clients if it makes sense. This is another part of the tuning process. So, and kind of the way the system works. So we're taking all the event data, we're queuing it, consolidating it, archiving it. I'll get into that a little bit more later. We're parsing, aggregating, categorizing, and then we're ultimately correlating and analyzing, so that we can and you can respond, investigate, and then obviously report, depending on if that's a real-time report or after the fact report, depending on what it may be. So to get kind of into the reports here, our system has several outputs. We have a real-time, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, depending on the type of report. And I'm kind of going to touch base on a few of them here. One of our strong suits is, again, on top of customization, is our human element, our gray matter side. So all of our reports have that human aspect, that gray matter aspect. Our daily reports are written by one data security analyst and reviewed and sent by another. Our monthly reports and everything, have that user touch. They do obviously have some system generated, automatically generated portions, but the important part, the executive summary, is obviously handwritten by a qualified data security analyst. Here's an example of one of our daily reports. Hence the daily report, hence the word daily. This is a report you receive every day for yesterday's events. It will give you any IDS, IPS information that you would need to investigate, or that we may have already reported to you. And then we have a bunch of Elm stats, accounts created, and then so this is to be in an easily digestible form. Soon I'll be showing you the portal, which, drills down into all this information. But the idea here is that you can quickly look and see that Bob logged into the VPN at 12:25 a.m. last night, or whatever it may be. And since these slides, we've actually added geolocation. And again, as we customize and develop organically, all of our customers see that benefit. Again, we have some more Elm stats and unresolved issues where we track anything that takes longer than, say, a week or say a day to resolve. We can keep track of that, and it creates a paper trail, and also lets you know that's something that we're continuing to look at. It keeps everybody on the same page. And last but not least, sensor stats. That's a metric, a quality control metric, to make sure that we're receiving what we should and the system's working as it should, essentially. A little bit more about our monthly reports, our compliant reports, monthly, weekly, quarterly, depending on your engagement. This includes a executive summary, like I was saying before, written by a data security analyst, and it takes all of the data from all of our systems, along with all the generated report sections, and we take that and we really boil that down to its essence, and let you know what has happened, any trends that we're seeing that are out of the norm, anything that we've addressed for you, and that way you can sit down with that in your incident response team meetings or your board meetings, and really know exactly what's going on and be able to show that to your whole organization, and get everybody on the same page and make sure everybody knows what's going on. Next, I'd like to hop out to the portal. So I need to stop here for one moment. And I'm kind of just going to go through and demo what our system looks like, and hopefully provide some knowledge there. I think I'm ready. Let me share this. Okay, so essentially we have a couple series of dashboards. I've kind of spoken about our different reporting elements. When it comes to especially our Elm system, well, all of our systems are extremely customizable, but the Elm system really sees a massive benefit there, because as we go through this, you'll see that we have so many needles that we're pulling out of the haystack, as we like to call them. There's just so much noise, and to pull out the relevant information sometimes can be hard, and obviously when it's in the haystack, you can't see it at all. So in terms of customization and reporting, essentially anything you see here for our system can be customized to be a real-time event, looking for real-time activity, or put in the daily or on the Elm dashboard that we're looking at here. So basically, the Elm dashboard for us is supposed to be an extension of the daily report that you receive. So you're able to come in here, see trends with our graphs. Again, all this is completely customizable during our engagement and tuning process with our client. And then anything that you would see on the actual um, daily report, you have all the information right here. You can drill directly down into it and see all the details of the raw log and any additional information. So for example, on the daily report, we keep it simple and just say Alice logged in at 10:49. But then if you needed to drill down and get more information, you can do that on our dashboard. The same thing with these other sections, as you can see here. Another important feature of all of our dashboards, and I'll be showing the IPS IDS dashboard here in a moment, but is our acknowledgement engine. So the idea with the acknowledgement engine is that we are giving our clients the ability to create a paper trail, that somebody's looking at your logs, or somebody's reviewing the traffic and reviewing your logs to show that you're creating the paper trail and somebody is looking on a daily basis. And then what we can do is we can generate a report, and you can there's more ammo for your auditors and your examiners. And it covers some CAT compliance that Dan could probably immediately give you the exact statement for. However, my memory is not that quick. So I think what I want to do is just briefly kind of run through the way our interfaces work, and then kind of go to the health reporting and archiving forensic side, and then I'll jump back to the presentation. So Dan, I have no clue where I am on time, but I'm trying to keep it quick. So this is our authentication interface.
Take your time, Mike.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. So this is our authentication interface. So basically what we've done is we've taken those needles and we pulled them out and broken them into different visualization interfaces to make them easier to parse, read, and use. So this one is our authentication. So it mainly covers everything Windows authentication related. We can see some of the stuff that we're seeing in the daily report and the dashboard here. Accounts created, accounts deleted, accounts disabled. As you can imagine, those are all the needles we would want to see if any of those were to happen. Again, with the ability, and then we've thrown VPN here. Sometimes that fits, sometimes it doesn't. So we've again, you can drill down instantly. I'll drill down to a different one just so we can see some different data than what we were seeing before. Again, the authentication interfaces have a little more value to them in terms that you can actually change your criteria and drill down on a specific name. There's a very simple but powerful text string search, which allows you to drill down, which allows you to search on pivot on user, system, service, whatever ends up showing up in the raw log. If this was a live service, not a demo, all the hosts that were going into this interface would be selectable, so you could just see the logs from that one host or a certain host, and then obviously the ability to change the date and time. So we have a little more granularity on the actual interfaces and the investigation interfaces, as we like to call them. So we have a few here. I'm just kind of going to go through them because you have the basics of the interface now. This one is an alpha development. It's our core interface, and you can see we have some very important core logs that we would want to see and report on. And next we have the ASA firewall interface. This is also customizable to whatever firewall infrastructure that you're using in your organization. So, Sonic Wall or whatever it may be. But once again, we have kind of the best practice set here of needles, of definitions that we've pulled out, and the ability to instantly drill down. This is a good example of where there's some correlation available, because as we can see here, we're looking at access control lists and denies and things of that nature coming from your firewall. So we can correlate that with the data coming from your IPS IDS system. So we can see if you more quickly catch attacks at the firewall perimeter, things of that nature. Next, we have the configuration interface. This is, I like to jokingly call this the misconfiguration interface, because this is usually where we find misconfiguration on our clients' networks while we're deploying and tuning. As you can see here, we're looking for missing files and registry errors and valid domain names. So as you can see how this could easily be used to find misconfigurations on our network. I'd say I use it more than any of our clients do, this particular interface. Last but not least, we have the hardware interface, usually a very quiet interface. It's looking for any hardware issues, disk failure, disk full, network adapter issues. USB also makes it in this. So anytime a USB device, USB drive is stuck into a system, it would show up here. And then also we have, real-time rules. Disk full or disk nearing capacity is a good example of our real-time default rules. One of the real-time default rules that we have already in place by default as part of what we like to call our greatest hits. So anytime anybody would stick a USB in, we would see that as long as we're getting logs from that device. And this is kind of to the compliance side and who's watching the watchers and where's the system health, is it working well? This is our health report. So this is being checked 2 times a day, or 2 times a shift, 3 times a day, 3 shifts a day, so 6 times a day, 2 times a shift by our data security analyst. And also, we have systems in the back that are sending alerts, letting us know when any of your critical systems have stopped reporting in, or if the system is not receiving the level of logs that we're expecting, or even if we're receiving more logs than what we're expecting. We have those thresholds set in place. So some of the basic features of our health report is, we're obviously looking at, free space on the sensor, kind of an important thing. We're, like I kind of mentioned a minute ago, we're looking for data stream checks. So we're making sure the data is flowing through our network, the logs are coming through to our system at a kind of acceptable range that we set up during the tuning process. And then, we have all of your devices, and if they haven't checked in the last 4 hours, they turn red, we get alerts, and then we notify you based on your decision tree. We have this decision tree set up for both the, we set up a decision tree for both the IDS and IPS side, and then when we see particular events come through, we take particular actions, whether it be email you through ticketing, call you, email a third-party vendor, whatever it may be. So if we see that any of your critical devices haven't checked in, we let you know. Obviously, we're not getting logs from that device, but more importantly, it might be offline, and there may be some issues there that we can alert you to. And that kind of rolls us into our kind of last but not least little interface here. And it's just a sample of our archive report. So what our system does, and what I would look for in a system, is something that takes all of your logs from all of your devices, archives them and hashes them in a forensically sound manner. What we do is we hold 395 days on our sensor, and then we ask for a segregated area on your network, segregated space on your network, where we can copy that archive and that hash every night, as part of what we like to call midnight caching. So every night we do midnight processing, we archive those, hash those, we run analytics on everything as part of that, and we build your dashboards, your interfaces, and all the reporting, obviously. But then the other piece is we take all of your logs, hash them, and keep them in a forensically sound manner. That way, that we haven't messed with them and nobody else has messed with them. So if we need to go back, or you need to go back and do any investigation, you can, knowing that those are safe. I think I just want to touch on a couple things real quick, and I can get back to the PowerPoint, I think. This is our IPS IDS dashboard. I just want to touch on it real quick. We're rolling this out to our clients, and it's just essentially, it kind of was born out of the Elm dashboard. Just a kind of a quick at a glance what's going on with your IPS IDS side. Shows your sensor stats, last IP blocked, and just some updated some system health for the IDS IPS side, we had it for the Elm side, and I think eventually we'll end up merging all these. Like Dan said, it's kind of where you're going in the future. It's to some respects. So I think that does it for the actual demo there. So let me get back to my PowerPoint. Give me one moment. Okay. So we went through the deliverables essentially. I think I hit on all of those: the reporting, the portal, forensics. I also touched a bit on how we can assist with compliance. We have the health report, which I showed. I spoke about the acknowledgement system. We also have some back-end quality control reports to make sure that we're watching that our DSAs, who's watching the watcher type thing. We want to make sure our DSAs are watching the logs and providing that service that we're promising and meeting and exceeding those expectations. And then again, kind of touching on forensics. So I think that brings me to my last point, which is how are you handling correlation? So correlation is becoming more and more of a question I get more and more. There's systems in the back end that do a lot of the correlation, and that connect all these moving parts. As those systems evolve, we're looking at them more and more. I think Dan even had mentioned that a little bit earlier. However, we feel like our strong suit is in our gray matter. We really see that that's essentially what you need at the end of the day to connect those pieces. Is the gray matter, the intelligence of your 24/7 or whoever you have looking at it to know that this is normal, this is expected, this is something new, thinking outside the box of those standard systems. Those systems are constrained, they're held with that in that box. So what's thinking outside that box? And as Dan and I both said, things are evolving, and that box is changing. But there's always going to be that gray matter that has to connect it back. Dan, I think that's it for me.
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Something everybody always really likes is the fact that you can mute Dan Hadaway.
Well, I didn't mute you this time, I promise.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now real quick is just kind of walk a little bit through the Infotex proposition. I hope that, when Mike showed you, we had to show you something, so we only could show you our system. But we've been into business since 2000. And, early on, we bought Paradigm Shift Security is how we actually broke into the banking business, because banks and credit unions won't work with you unless you're already working with banks and credit unions. But we're actually the people that founded BleedingSnort.com, which evolved into Bleeding Edge Snort. And then when SourceFire decided they were tired of us using the name that they had trademarked, Snort, that organization changed to emergingthreats.net, which then went commercial and ended up being sold for a lot of money, etc. We've been published in many different magazines. We are in the FFIEC examination program. In 2003, we started, documenting who we're working with. We worked with primarily healthcare and banks and that sort of thing. But we did get, we consulted with Purdue University. We were consultants for the University of Tennessee, et cetera. About 2004 is when we became the preferred service provider of the Indiana Bankers Association. And really, I like to say the rest is history. In 2015, we crossed the 15-year point. We've been doing this for a long time. We definitely have everything that, is on the bullet point list in terms of, what, makes an MSSP. We didn't start developing event log management until 2005, but suffice it to say, if you engage with us, you're going to be engaging with the system that is about 12 years old on the event log management side and 17 years old on the IDS, IPS side. threat intelligence. We founded one of the companies that became one of the premier threat intelligence organizations of the world. And again, emerging threats is we get our signatures from their commercial set, and you know, are doing very well with them. We've been looking at incident response management as the whole. We're involved in policy and procedure development, can definitely and also very often help our clients develop their own incident response teams and train those teams and test those teams. Obviously, we do intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, you know, the whole 9 yards that we've been talking to you about. We end up developing funky diagrams like this to help our clients' management understand how their incident response program fits into the bigger picture. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of this webinar, I said that incident response was the intersection of risk management, awareness, and disaster recovery, I think is what I said. But this diagram kind of helps to illustrate that. We sell a good night's sleep. That's what we do for a living. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, you can just give us a written notice and we let you out of the contract. It's that simple. What we sell is a good night's sleep. We're unique because we were one of the first people to enter the FFIEC examination program. We've been in it since 2009. We can't say how well we did in our examinations, but we are allowed to say that we're on a 2-year examination cycle. Now, what that actually does is that sets up a whole set, as you know, as a financial institution, if you know your examiners don't do all the auditing, they require you to get audit reports that they review. We are a very customized service. We're very proud of our customization. We're very proud of our system development lifecycle controls. We're very proud of our organic development process. We also take logs from anything. We don't, because we're very customized, we don't need to worry about cookie cutter processing. So if you want us to watch the logs on your VoIP system, get us those logs and we can do it. If you want us to scrape a screen, we can do that. If you want us to read PDF files, we can do that. We were doing change detection in 2005, which became a baseline statement. It's where we scan your ports on a monthly basis, I believe is what the baseline statement in the cybersecurity assessment tool calls for. And though we do work with a lot of healthcare institutions, we actually started our company for healthcare since 2003 when we bought Paradigm Shift Security. We've been very, very knee deep in banks. We are very bank and credit union centric. We are very proud of the quality controls that we've evolved over the last 17 years, including the training of our personnel, including the human reporting that Mike talked about. We want to own the sensors because we don't want to have any finger pointing situations. We want you to blame us if something doesn't go right. And so, you know, if you do engage with us, it's kind of a little weird quirk in our contract where we ask you to pay for the cost of the sensors, but we actually retain ownership. That's a quality control. We get audited. This year's audit plan is that we were audited twice. We also had social engineering against our NOC staff, and we're having an interim examination where they just come in and make sure that we got audited. So I really feel like the last question, or the 10th question that should be asked, well, I think there's 11 questions, but the 10th question that we should be asking our potential SIEM provider is, what quality control processes do you have in place? You know, how are you being audited? But more importantly, that SDLC controls, the system development lifecycle controls, how do they work? Because as you probably know, most auditors don't know enough to know whether or not the SDLC system is working or not. So what I'd like to end this webinar with is the cybersecurity assessment tool. I mean, it was just updated last month, and I know you're all excited about having to go through it one more time and decide what statements you can say yes with compensating controls to. But if we go back to the security monitoring architecture, the risk monitoring architecture that we've been preaching for years, you know, we've got the non-technical side of it, we've got the technical side of it, we got the assurance side of it, and the way we like to draw that out is that we have, you know, 3 teams here, right? We have the technology recovery team, They're doing data loss prevention, they're doing endpoint security, they're doing malware prevention. Then of course the managed security service provider is scanning those ports and looking for open ports that haven't been shut. We're monitoring the logs in real time, but also from a trend perspective, we're correlating logs to network traffic, and of course we're utilizing our emerging threats signatures to stay on top of IPS and IDS. And then of course the third team over here is the incident response team, and they are trying to monitor for non-technical threats. They're the ones that are watching FSI, SAC, and that sort of thing. And so if you can imagine whatever cybersecurity assessment tool you're using, the tool Infotex developed is what I call at the statement level. So we went through and we numbered every single statement in the cybersecurity assessment tool. And then what we did is if it was in domain 1, the first statement in domain 1 was number 1001. The first statement in domain 5 was number 5001. And so what I'm really wanting to do here is I'm wanting to show you that your technology recovery team is already, if they're doing data loss prevention, they're already handling this statement from the third domain. Now, statement 142 is pretty deep in the domain, right? So it's probably more an innovative, if not, advanced, or maybe even, at the top level of maturity. But if you are doing data loss prevention, you're addressing that statement in the cybersecurity assessment tool. If you've got endpoint security in place, you're addressing the 70th statement in the third domain. So kudos to your technology recovery team. This looks like it might be more in the intermediate level of maturity here. Malware prevention, well, we're all doing that, and that's getting some pretty intermediate, maybe some evolving statements. Maybe number 70 is a baseline statement. I'm not exactly sure. But again, kudos to the technology recovery team. In this particular case, they're helping the institution comply with 5 of the CAT's statements. The managed security service provider, the incident response team is next. And suffice it to say, they're pretty much helping the institution cover all of the baseline statements in domain 2. Threat intelligence is domain 2, and that just kind of exudes, in my opinion, what the incident response team should be handling: threat intelligence. But if we look at what the MSSP does, well, first of all, there's that pesky little third statement in that third domain that says we're supposed to be scanning our ports on a monthly basis and reporting changes and asking, well, why did this port get opened? Well, it was because of a vendor needing to come in. Well, is the vendor done? Well, then let's go ahead and shut this port. So that's one we've been doing again since 2005. But look at everything that's covered on the event log management side of things. I mean, we're talking about these down here are definitely those domain 2 statements are definitely baseline statements. I would say these are probably, intermediate, if not evolving, probably intermediate, if not evolving, but we're really getting some maturity into the system with the event log management statements. Just the engagement, the tuning process itself helps us address these 3 statements, and then IPS IDS is covering, what are this, about 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 statements. So it's amazing how well our business did after June 30th, 2015, compared to how well we were doing prior to that. Because as you can see here, the cybersecurity assessment tool kind of codified things that Infotex have been saying for years, at least since 2003, 2005 or so. And they required it out of financial institutions. So the last question I feel you should be asking is, are you, the SIEM provider, are you going to put where you help us comply with the cybersecurity assessment tool in your contract? So I'd like to end this webinar just by summarizing the top 3 reasons to outsource security monitoring. Starts with the need to have 24/7 monitoring, and really kind of ends with the segregation of duties benefit. And then why would you use us? Well, first, we're very customized. We're focused on smaller community-based institutions. We've been doing this since the year 2000, and then we never really even talked about all the ancillary benefits of becoming a client of Infotex, but you get free access to our boilerplates, you know, SOC 2 reviews are $200 cheaper per review, et cetera, et cetera. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here. So in conclusion, you really can turn lemons into lemonade. We see it all the time, and it requires a proactive approach that would involve the construction of a SIEM. Mike, were there any questions this time?
Yeah, actually, we have a few, Dan. The first one is it okay for the board to accept the risk of the non-segregation of duties in a small bank?
Well, actually, that's a very good question. First of all, I think if you haven't segregated your duties yet, then the bank or the board already has been accepting that risk, whether or not we've escalated it to them or not. But I think the question is more centered around if I have a nice, neat board minutes, you know, referral saying that the board is aware of the fact that the person who's watching the system is also the person who can change the system, and we accept the risk from that. My opinion on that is that if that ends up in your board minutes, you are guaranteeing that an auditor and examiner is going to have to require that you segregate duties. I would not take that approach, because I feel like now what you've done is you've educated your board on a huge issue that if it causes problems, is putting you in a lot of legal risk. You don't want to have a situation where you're in litigation. You know, the ISO is already gone because somebody has accused the ISO of doing something. It could very well be the ISO that's suing the institution, and the ISO was fired because you weren't segregating duties properly, and so it looked like the ISO was doing something that, you know, caused the ISO to be fired. And now you've got in your minutes that the board was aware of the fact that this causes all these problems and decided that they were okay with it. I just don't feel that would be like saying, can the board accept the risk of loaning money to the homeless guy? Yeah, the board could accept that risk, but how is that going to fly when an examiner comes in and says, hey, you've loaned money to a homeless guy? You know, the board accepted the risk, I grant you that, but I still think it was a bad move. So anyway, I hope that answers that question. That was a good question, Mike. I don't know if you noticed, but I kind of was thinking of my answer as I went. What other questions?
Thanks, Dan. I have a few more. This one came in a bit before we were talking about it, and I want to get a little more on of your take on it anyway. So, do you correlate logs to network traffic?
Well, yeah, and I think that's the question. I think that, you know, is always the moving target. I know that we're developing, you know, queues. You guys are queuing stuff up, etc. I know there's applications out there that we want to invest in once we feel like they've come out of the innovative phase and the early adopter phase. But I feel like we're still already are correlating logs to network traffic, just because of all the training you guys are providing on a regular basis that basically says, hey, when this happens, you know, go check over here. The way I like to put it is that, and the way I like to describe, you know, correlation is that if you hear a knock on the door, we're going to look out the window to see who's there before we actually open the door. Most of that is all manual right now. It's being handled by gray matter, as Mike likes to say. But definitely it is in our plans to take advantage of some of the automated programs that are starting to pop up now.
Great answer. Thanks, Dan. Two more. Does your SIEM? Sorry, hey, we got a lot of hungry people needing some answers. Does your SIEM already give us the ability to manage incident response team calendar functions?
Okay, that actually, now whoever asked that question is heading where we're heading. No, currently our SIEM does not have the ability to manage the incident response team's calendar. However, one of the things that, and really this is kind of the last piece of it, because A, it's a lot easier to develop, but B, we're still trying to wait and see what is actually required out of the incident response team before we commit it to code. But having said all that, what we're envisioning is and actually I think that if I can find on my laptop here an incident response program, which I know I have a web workshop coming up, so I'm pretty sure I already have one. Hope I'm not revealing anything here. Let me see here, didn't I? Oh, okay, it's still in zip format. But what we want to do is we want to take everything that's here, the training, the calendar, the testing, even the insurance review, by the way, the response tools. And by the way, all this is just one of those 3 teams. Okay, this is the incident response team's tool set. This is their kit. And so what we're hoping is that our portal facilitates this, so you don't have to remember a directory structure or whatever, but it actually goes so far as to facilitate then the incident, what actually I would call the information security calendar, because there's more than just incident response involved in that. But for banks that have an incident response team and a steering committee, I'm envisioning that our portal would be pulled up by both of those 2 groups, because it would be overarching IT governance rather than just incident response management. So I hope that answered that question. That was a good question too, Mike.
Thanks, Sam. One last question. Does your contract spell out what baseline statements your system will help us comply with?
Oh, well, they obviously asked that question before my last slide. But yes, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. Our contract uses the cybersecurity assessment tool as an example. And what I mean by that is that the cybersecurity assessment tool is just one guidance at one time. You know, I mean, actually twice now, right? Because it was released in 2015 and was updated again in 2017. But what our contract actually says is that we are required to provide written documentation as to how our system helps you comply with guidance as it's released, as you request it. And we usually will write a, for something big like the cybersecurity assessment tool, we wrote a white paper, or when we did all these, webinars and such. But if you have a guidance A, B, C, that for some reason you've told your examiner that, yeah, well, the reason we're handling that with by our MSSP, get with us. We'd be happy to help your examiner or your auditor understand how we actually comply with that. And that's what our contract says. So I hope I hope that answered the question. We use the cybersecurity assessment tool currently as an example of what we're required to do for any guidance.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. That is all the questions.
Okay, great. Well, I think it's time then for me to turn control of this over to you, Mike. So
thank you, sir.
Thanks for your part.
Thank you, Dan. Again, so much good information. And everybody have a great day.
When you view an InfoTex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoTex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoTex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoTex reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.